Hey, happy champers, it's Marnie from Bubble and Flute here, and thank you for joining me this afternoon for my Wednesday afternoon Facebook Live. Santé! You may wonder what it is I'm doing alive and having a glass of champagne on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm in Brisbane, Australia, and today is a public holiday for our show day. So in Brisbane, we get the day off. So I am enjoying the moment. Hi, Mon! Thanks for watching and having a glass of champagne in the afternoon. Shame it's indoors because it is a cracking day outside. So August is like deepest, darkest winter for us in Australia, but here today in Brisbane, I think it's a maximum of 27 degrees. So it is insanely good weather. So it's a bit of a shame to be inside, but it's the easiest way to do a live broadcast. So what I promised I was going to talk about today on my Facebook Live is, if you don't know, you've probably been living under a rock, but I've just spent the last 5 weeks in Champagne in France, visiting 53 different champagne producers and tasting countless different cuvées, and I've been sharing a lot of that on my Insta feed and my Facebook feed, and my Facebook friends on my personal account were pretty much ready to snooze me because they're pretty much over hearing about my trip after 5 weeks and so many visits. But because it was so long and I took in so much while I was there, it's actually really hard to download all that information, and I do want to share as much as I possibly can about what I learnt and what I did and where I went and who I saw with everybody. So the good news is, because I did 53 visits, that means I can talk about a different producer on my blog a week for the next year. So you've got plenty to look forward to there. I will be sharing all of that with you. But more importantly, today I just wanted to do the first in a series of these, and this is just a really general overview of my top 5 tips for traveling in Champagne. And then at the end, there's an idea that I came up with while I was traveling and since I've come home about how I can better help people who want to visit Champagne and do their own trips. So I'm going to flag that with you at the end, and I'm really keen to hear your feedback on that. But for now, I hope you've had time to grab a glass of champers, pop a bottle, and get ready. I'm not going to talk for hours, that's what I say, but I could actually go on for quite a bit. So, all right, my top 5 tips for visiting Champagne. So, tip number 1 is you actually have to visit Champagne. You can't have the full proper experience of what Champagne has to offer from my blog, as much as I like to help. But also, most people that I speak to, even some serious Champagne fans, when they do a trip to Champagne, they treat it like a day trip from Paris. Now, my most important tip is you cannot appreciate the beauty, the diversity, and everything that Champagne has to offer on a day trip from Paris, because you'll get to visit maybe 2 different producers. My bet is you will stay in one of the major cities. And look, the major cities, the 2 biggest towns, I mean, they're awesome and they've got a lot to offer, but there is so much more to Champagne than that. So the Champagne district is UNESCO World Heritage listed. And for bloody good reason. If you saw my photos on my feed, it is spectacularly stunning. And you don't really get to appreciate the countryside and the entire region and the slopes and the valleys and all the beautiful buildings and the architecture from Epernay or Hans, as gorgeous as those towns are. So my first tip for anybody visiting Champagne is 3-day minimum. I'm sorry guys, if you're going to go all the way to France, you've got to give it at least 3 days. And that brings me to my second point, is not just about visiting Champagne, but where to go when you visit Champagne. So I started off a little bit before saying that the 2 major towns, so Hans, Reims, as we would say it in English, is like the capital, I guess, of the Champagne area from a size perspective, but Epernay is probably more at the heart of the Champagne region. They're completely different and both amazing towns. So I'd kind of leave Reims or Hans to the end of your trip. There is restaurants, there's bars, it's a bit of a party town. But I would actually start visiting Epernay, which has this beautiful street, quite widely known as the richest street on the planet, called the Avenue de Champagne, and dotted along both sides of that street, which I ran down, so I can say goes for about 1 kilometre, are champagne producers. Big ones, Moet and Chandon, Paul Roger, Perrier-Jouet, and smaller ones that we don't get in Australia and you would never have heard of. There are also other champagne producers in Epernay that are not on the Avenue de Champagne, which I do need to give a shout out to because they get missed sometimes and they get a little bit sad about that because they have amazing, amazing wines to offer. So Epernay is a little bit quieter, but it's quaint and it's beautiful. So definitely spend some time in those two towns, but also have a go at spending a few nights in a small village, and definitely hire a car and drive through the different villages. Now, I was lucky enough to stay in 2 different villages while I was there, or Ville. Now, that's really, really close to Epernay, and it is actually really, really popular with tourists to do a visit because that's where the Abbey of Dom Pérignon is, or the abbey where the Dom Pérignon is actually buried. So a lot of people visit Haute-Ville to see that, but it has some amazing accommodation. It has some amazing champagne producers, and it's got a really, really cool little champagne bar that is an absolute must, and that will be on my must-do list when I get around to writing it. So I also visited other villages in the area, and Rilly la Montagne, which has again got a really cool champagne bar, amazing producers, all really easy to access by car. I stayed for 3 nights in a beautiful domain owned by the champagne house Palmer & Co. in Chigny-les-Roses, which is a beautiful, beautiful small town, again, with champagne producers and countryside that will just blow your mind that it is that beautiful. So tip number 1 is go to Champagne, spend a minimum of 3 days, but I reckon you could spend 10 days and not get bored. Tip number 2 is where to stay and get out of the big cities. See them, but also make sure you enjoy the rest of the countryside as well. Tip number 3 is when to go. Now, it's obviously super popular to visit Europe in summer, and that makes a shitload of sense. I get it. But the thing about visiting Champagne in high season, in August, which is the peak of their summer, is that is their summer, and it is when everybody takes their summer holidays. So you will find producers and houses that are open and taking visitors, but you will also find a lot that are not open. You'll also find accommodation is much, much harder to come by, and it'll be much, much harder to get appointments because everybody's there and half the champagne houses aren't open. And the weather is really, really hot. And the added complexity about when to go is traditionally, for the last generation or so, the Champagne region has done its harvest in September. So that's when they harvest all their grapes. So when they do their harvest, 2 things happen. First of all, every champagne guru, writer, grape picker on the planet rocks up in town. So again, getting accommodation is incredibly hard. But again, I mean, harvest, if they don't have grapes and they don't have good grapes, they don't have champagne. So the producers, particularly the smaller ones, are just ridiculously focused on getting the job done. So they're really not going to have the time that I know they want to give to champagne tourism, because I had this conversation ad nauseum. They welcome visitors with open arms, but it's just, that's a really difficult time of year for them. And this year, most unpredictably, is that the champagne harvest is actually starting early because they've had such a hot summer. The grapes are so beautifully ripe that instead of it being September, sometimes mid-September is when harvest is. This year they're starting harvesting in late August, which also means everybody had to push their summer holidays, either shorten them or push them a little bit back into July. So it also means that, you won't get the attention that you're going to deserve if you're going to try and visit in either August or September, would be my tip. Even anything after Bastille Day, which is the 14th of July. Now, I was in Paris for Bastille Day, and then the Sunday, the day afterward, was World Cup final. And that was my last day in Paris. Even any time from then, things start to heat up in terms of tourism, but also wind down in terms of availability and busyness. So that would be my tip, would be to, I'm sorry, that's just my puppy dog wanting to come in at the door. See you, Juki, gotta come back later. So that would be my tip for when to go any other time of the year. So April, May, spectacular. October, November, amazing if you want to catch the sort of seasons that sit either side and have the milder weather. That would be my hot tip of when to go. So we've done, you've got to go and you've got to spend more than at least 3 days there. Second tip was which villages to visit when you go. Third tip was when to go, and more importantly, when not to go. And so my fourth tip is another really critical one. Now, I knew this, but even when I was traveling through Champagne, I met heaps of other travelers, Australians, Austrians, Germans, you name it. And most people probably aren't as obsessed with Champagne as I am. So they don't actually realize that what to do when you go to Champagne is actually prepare and plan before you get to Champagne. So you can get a same day appointment at some of the really, really big producers in Reims, no problem. But if you want to get into somewhere really cool or a little bit niche or a little bit special, you need to contact them in advance and book. Now, you don't always have to pay. Some places there would be fees for it. Some places there's not. But the most important thing is decide where you want to go early on and then contact them and make an appointment and lock it in so that you know that you're going to get to visit where you want to go. So that's my fourth tip, is you've got to be prepared. You can go and just rock up and you'll see something, but you will not have the same experience that you would have if you booked and planned ahead. And that brings me to tip number 5. And one of the idea that I wanted to flag with you is I've kind of been and I've spent a lot of time there and I've met a lot of people and it's given me a lot of ideas and connections. So what I really want to toss the idea around doing is being your Champagne travel concierge. So tip number 5 is ask me, contact me. I mean, I'm going to put a lot of information on the blog for you. And there are a lot of amazing tours that you can do with local people in Champagne, which I think is really fabulous to do a tour with locals. And I've met quite a few of them and I've got some great recommendations. There's also some amazing Champagne gurus from Australia who host incredible tours every year, and they are amazing, but you've got to be there and this week at that time, and that isn't necessarily doable for everybody, and none of us in Australia can be there 365 days a year as much as I would personally love to. So I wanted to fill what I see as a huge gap in the market for people who are just doing independent travel and they don't know where to go or what to do or who to contact. I've been to 53 producers, so I've had some cracking experiences. I've had some really good experiences. I also had some experiences that I probably wouldn't be keen to repeat. And if you've only got 3 days in a Champagne region, you want to be sure you are not visiting one of the places that I'm probably not all that keen to go back to. Well, at least that would be my attitude anyway, if I had the opportunity to talk to somebody about it. So I don't know what you think. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I've actually got a friend, well, he's really a follower and we're kind of friends now, who's in Paris and Champagne at the moment, but I can't see that he's watching this, Travis. And so he contacted me while I was in Champagne and said, hey, I've got like 10 days coming up. Where should I go? What should I do? So I wrote him this enormous, big, long, lengthy email and helped him book an amazing, heaps of tours and visit houses. So I know he found that really valuable. He'd been before, but he really didn't know where to start. There's 5,000 producers, there's 314 villages. Like, it's just such an overwhelming concept, and if you've only got a few days, you really want to make the most of it. So that's my idea. It's something I'm keen to progress on top of free advice all the time, all over the blog, links, contacts. But I'm really keen to talk to people who may want me to help them put together an itinerary. Probably looking for a couple of crash test dummies and working with my local contacts. I think it's really important to know people on the ground that I can connect with you with when you land in Champagne. So they are my top 5 tips, although I actually do have a 6th tip because I work in marketing and I'm a blogger, so I do words, not numbers. I'm not very good at counting. So I do have a 6th tip. And my 6th tip is either take an extra suitcase or allocate a budget for posting your Champagne souvenirs home, because I brought back a cracking collection of Champagne merchandise, stuff that you cannot get your hands on here in Australia. So I also bought some back for one of my very, very dear friends who asked me to go shopping for her. So in fact, this glass here, so this glass shape, I use this glass shape all the time and it's huge. Oops, my mic just fell off. Hang on. I'm sure you can still hear me because I'm a bit loud. So that's not, volume is not normally a problem with me. But let me just put this back on here. So you can get these branded. It's really hard to see the branding on this one, but it actually says Champagne Ayala nice and subtly around the bottom. So what else did I bring back with me? Oops, I've got this side. So I got these really cool, very similar shape glasses from Veuve Clicquot. And so you can see the gorgeous, really subtle yellow stripe down the middle. So they're a little bit of fun. So my champagne glass collection's going off. This one came from GH Mum, specifically for their RSRV range, which it's actually, you can't get that in Australia. So it's a champagne only souvenir. And then I've got another one here from Palmer & Co. What else have I got behind me here? I've got this Taittinger champagne hat, which I actually brought back as a present from my mum. She hasn't worn it yet because they've still got the cardboard on the inside. But again, you can buy some super, super fun champagne merchandise over there. And I've lost my mic again. I'm getting a bit too carried away today. Sorry. That's what happens when you try and move around too much. What else have I got here? So Veuve Clicquot tea towel, nice and bright and super fun. So you're able to pick these up in a lot of the places have their own shops. And what you can't see is right here behind me on the table, I've got this champagne bucket from Palmer & Co. I've got this absolutely stunning Dom Perignon candle. Now this was like pretty expensive. It smells absolutely amazing. It's actually a really masculine smell, but I really like it. My sister-in-law who visited me and I set up a bunch of visits for us bought me that as a thank you gift, and I absolutely love that. I don't think I ever actually, my hair's gone crazy. I don't think I ever actually want to light it because it just smells so amazing. But really, really beautiful. On this side here, you can see a selection, I'll just turn the camera around, of actual champagnes that I got and sent back to Australia from. I was a bit self-indulgent in the first week of my travels, and I just, I visited places that I knew we could never get their champagnes in Australia. So when my friends joined me a little bit later on, I was a bit more inclusive and picked places that they knew of and I knew that they wanted to go to. But my first week, I just picked a whole bunch of places that I'd never heard of, some that I'd never heard of, others that I'd had recommended that I'd never been able to try their champagnes in Australia. So, and I brought back a few special bottles there for my cellar that I would never be able to buy here in Australia, and I'll keep them for a special occasion. This one here is a special, doesn't really look like a champagne bottle, and this one is actually from my friends Rachel and Alexi at WB Champagne, or Wafla Brie Champagne in Sussy, and it's actually a ratafia, which I'm going to write a bit about on the blog, which most Australian champagne fans would never have heard of before. So a ratafia, the best way I can describe it is it's kind of like Madeira or port, but half the strength. So it's at about 18% alcohol, and they actually serve it chilled in champagne. And they use it from the later pressings of the grapes, where the quality isn't as high as they want to use for champagne, but the quality's bang on to make other products like the ratafia, which is at about 17%. And it's actually really nice. I'm drinking it during winter as a little nip before bed. And then they also have a Mar de Champagne and Fin de Champagne, which is effectively like a whiskey. And they're more like the standard spirits, 37% alcohol, knock your socks off. And again, they use the third pressing. It's compulsory for the champagne houses to give that juice and the grapes to the distilleries to make the Fin de Champagne and Mar de Champagne. I actually even tried while I was there a Chardonnay vodka. So it was a vodka that was made from Chardonnay grapes. And all these products, can be called champagne products because they are all produced from grapes grown in the Champagne region. So, and they're produced at distilleries or producers within the Champagne region. So a little bit of cool stuff coming up on the blog about there is more to champagne than bubbles, believe it or not. So what else have I got here? And it's this crazy collection of champagne stoppers. So I've got probably about 30 of them now. So this is actually one from my last trip, Veuve Clicquot. I love that one. It's really cool. And I've got a similar style one here from another producer. This is the one that I've got from GH Mum. And you can get all of these at all the places you visited. This, funnily enough, is like a really popular style of stopper in the Champagne region at the moment. It's really cheap as chips. They sell for €2 or €3 and it's so effective. And then you just literally stick it on the top of the bottle. I don't know if you can actually see that. I might have to pop it up here. And then you just clip one side of each down over the lip with a little bit of downward pressure. There you go. And then it just sticks over the top of your bottle like that. Absolutely airtight. Works a treat. I actually use this particular one from Jean Vessel, which is a champagne house that I visited in my first week that you can't get in Australia. I used that the whole time that I was there. And yeah, they're plastic, but they're still super, super cool. You can get some super glam looking ones, which I've got like this one from Ruiner, which is like well classy in gold. And then I've got this other one here, which is from Taittinger, which is very gold and glamorous. And it's probably just going to come out on special occasions. But yeah, you can buy so much cool champagne stuff over there, branded by the big houses and branded by small producers that you can't get in Australia. So that would be tip number 6, is make sure you're ready to shop, and not just for the champagne products as well, but for the merchandise that you can get over there. So I think that's enough from me on a Sunday afternoon. Here's me thinking it's a day off on a Wednesday afternoon. Super keen to hear any comments, any questions. All my contact details are over on the blog, and you can DM me via Facebook as well. If you are thinking of a trip to Champagne and you are keen to talk to me about putting together a little bit of an itinerary, I would love to, and I can hook you up with my good friends on the ground who are doing some really cool stuff. You know, that was a big takeaway for me when I visited Champagne this time round compared to when I went 2 or 3 years ago, was that Champagne tourism is now becoming a huge thing. They're probably a little bit behind some of the other wine regions in terms of creating tourism, but they're really, really, really excited about doing it now. So not far from Epinay, a new resort has just opened called Royal Champagne Resort and Spa. And look, sucks because it opened the week after I left, but my mate Trav, who's there at the moment, has promised he's going to do a flyby and a guest review on it. And there's lots of the producers are now putting accommodation in Airbnb or B&Bs beside them. So I know Henri Giraud in IE, which is an amazing house. You're going to hear a lot more about them from me. They're in IE and they're putting some accommodation in. I stayed in Hauteville in a lodge which was associated with one of the champagne producers there. It was an Airbnb, but it meant that I got to go down and tour around, and just a really great way to get inside with the locals. So there's a lot of exciting things coming. There's another group called champagnebooking.com, and they have it's like a database where you can book with 50, 60 different producers. And I know, speaking to them while I was there as well, that they're working more closely with the producers to come up with some really great experiences. You can go on a tour and you can taste some champagne, but there's also another way of taking that up a notch and turning it into some really, really special experiences. So speaking of which, special experiences, I think I've just come up with my topic for my next week's Facebook Live, which I will run through my top 5 experiences. Now, I don't necessarily mean my top 5 visits. I'm not going to name names and pick houses because I love them all and I don't want to be seen like I have favorites, but I want to talk about top 5 experiences where I got to do things that I wouldn't necessarily have got to do anywhere else. Maybe seeing a bottle of champagne hand-gorged before my eyes and tasting it fresh from the bottle. I mean, stuff like that. Really, really cool experiences. So stay tuned for when my next live will be. If you do miss my lives, they will be kept on my Facebook video file. But the best way to know when I'm going to go live is subscribe to my email list, because everything's always on the blog, but it can be hard to find. But if you're on my email list, you will never miss a thing. I will send you everything I write, everything I record. Now that sounds really annoying. It's actually not. I usually send out a Sunday morning email. I like to think of it as just having a Sunday brunch with people who love champagne. So I flick you out an email about 10 o'clock on a Sunday, so you've had time to walk the dog, have breakfast, coffee and paper, clear the decks, and get ready for your latest digestion of awesome champagne news. And I highly recommend you do crack a bottle of champagne and have a glass too as well, because it's Sunday, right? And that's a fun thing to do. So thank you all for listening and watching, and please subscribe to my emails if you want to make sure you do not miss a thing. And don't forget to message me if you are keen on the idea of having a personal champagne concierge. Happy champers, have a lovely afternoon. Santé!